When we write, we don't write in vacuum. We are in conversation with other people. We listen to what others say, think about it, and we respond. We engage. How do we do that? I'm here to give a simple guideline. Now, this guideline will be specifically on biblical studies, but it will also be applicable to other fields. At times, I will refer to my book, Rebuilding a Post-Exilic Community, the Gola Community, and the other in the book of Ezra. I will refer to some specific paragraphs or pages from my book for illustration. First step, the thinking process. Number 1, read the primary source, and in this case, that will be the biblical text or the biblical passage. Read the text slowly, carefully, and as if you're reading that passage or text for the first time, not influenced by other people's interpretation or ideas. What does the text say? What is implied? What is nuanced? What comes before and after? In short, study the text and the context, the immediate context as well as the larger context. And then, after you do that, gather what you see or understand what the text is about, and find your evidence from the text itself. After you do that, move on to step number 2, which is read secondary sources. That is, what do other people say or argue or interpret about this text? How do they come to that conclusion? Their reasonings, their evidence. Consider and weigh their own evidence with the evidence that you have seen or found in the primary text. Now, at times, when you read secondary sources, you may come across quite different or even opposite interpretation of a given topic, a given passage, a given event. Particularly in those cases, consider where the author is coming from, the lens that they are using, so that you can give a fair interpretation, a fair judgment of their arguments. Now, the writing process. The writing process will also follow similar steps like the thinking or research process. Step number 1, introduce your text or your passage or topic and your understanding or argument or interpretation briefly. Step number 2, engage others. That is, what others have said about the text or topic. What do they say? How do they come to that conclusion? And then what do you think about that? That is, for example, whether you agree or disagree, and why. A fine way of engaging with other scholars or other ideas can be seen in my book, page 102, first paragraph, for example. And there will be different ways of doing that. You may first bring out the arguments that are most controversial, or you can start with the ones that are closest to your own understanding, or you can even start chronologically, the older ones, older or traditional ones first, to the more recent ones. You can start with what is most interesting to you too. And also, when you engage with other scholars, you can also let the other scholars or other ideas be in conversation with one another instead of just listing or reporting. This scholar say that, this scholar say this. Let them be in conversation as well. Examples of how to do that can also be found in my book. For example, again, page 102, 103. If you look at the paragraphs, how I let other scholars talk to each other. And then finally, the last step, and also the most important step, we can say, present your argument, present your understanding or your finding elaborately by giving your evidence, explaining how the evidence should be interpreted in the way you did and why.